The first time I realized my landlord wasn't just difficult, but actually a predator was the night he let himself into my apartment unannounced. I was in the middle of making dinner, cheap pasta with canned tomato sauce, the kind of meal you make when you're juggling student loan payments and rent that eats half your paycheck. I heard the rattle of the doorknob, then the distinct click of the lock turning. My whole body went cold. When the door swung open, there he was, Gary Thompson, 50 something, a heavy-set man with slicked back hair that always looked greasy, even when freshly combed. He had the kind of face that looked like it was permanently smirking, like life was one big inside joke that only he was in on. He wore his usual uniform of khaki pants, suspenders, and a button-up shirt stretched too tight across his gut. He didn't even look surprised to see me standing there with a wooden spoon in hand. He just sniffed the air like a rat catching a whiff of cheese. "Smells good in here," he said casually, like barging into a tenant's home without notice was completely normal. I remember stammering, You can't just come in here." My heart was racing so fast I could barely get the words out. My chest felt tight, my throat dry, but adrenaline was pumping so hard I could feel my fingertips tingling. Gary leaned against the doorframe, ignoring me. His beady little eyes scanned the apartment, not with curiosity, but with ownership, like he was checking inventory, just making sure everything's in order. You know how it is. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was grip the spoon tighter. That was the moment I realized to Gary I wasn't a tenant, I was prey. When I first signed the lease, I was desperate. I'd just been through a brutal breakup, and my ex kept the apartment we'd shared. I needed a place fast, somewhere I could afford on my modest salary as a paralegal at a small firm. The listing had seemed like a miracle. One bedroom, decent neighborhood, below market rate. What I didn't realize was that Gary thrived on desperate tenants. The lease was full of quirks. A clause saying he could inspect the premises at reasonable times, which he interpreted as any time he damn well pleased. Hidden fees for things like maintenance convenience, so $50 a month, though he never actually fixed anything. A rule about quiet enjoyment, but only applied to tenants. He regularly blasted old country music while tinkering with his truck at 2 a.m. At first, I told myself it was just temporary. I could survive 1 year, then move. But by month 3, I realized Gary was testing boundaries. First, it was accidentally double charging me for utilities. Then it was losing my rent check and demanding late fees. When I showed him the bank statement proving the check had cleared, he just chuckled and said, "Guess the bank's wrong." Ha! That chuckle. God, I grew to hate that sound. It wasn't laughter. It was dismissal, a way of saying you don't matter and I'm untouchable. It wasn't just me. Slowly, I started talking to other tenants, and the stories were horrifying. An elderly woman on the second floor, Mrs. Delgado, told me Gary refused to fix her leaking ceiling until she'd baked him one of her famous pies. A single mom, Tasha, said he accidentally shut off her heat in January after she complained about mold. A young couple whispered that Gary had threatened to evict them if they didn't pay cash under the table for pet fees, even though their lease allowed pets. We were all suffering. But Gary had designed the perfect trap. Most of his tenants were people without money, without time, or without the knowledge to fight back. He picked targets who wouldn't risk a legal battle: immigrants, single parents, broke students, people who couldn't just pack up and leave. And he knew it. That smirk never left his face. The breaking point for me came 6 months in. I had just gotten home from a brutal day at work. My boss had dumped last-minute filings on me, and I'd stayed late formatting exhibits. All I wanted was to collapse into bed. But when I unlocked my apartment, I stepped into a nightmare. The place reeked of cigarette smoke. My bookshelves had been rifled through, papers scattered on the floor. The closet doors stood wide open, clothes disturbed. And sitting right there on the kitchen counter was a sticky note in Gary's scrawled handwriting. "Fixing your closet door. You're welcome." I nearly vomited from the violation. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Every instinct screamed at me he'd been in here, alone, touching my things. When I stormed downstairs to confront him, Gary didn't even bother pretending. He leaned back in his recliner, chewing toothpicks, watching some reality show at full volume. "What's the big deal?" he said lazily. "Closet door needed fixing. I saved you a call." My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists just to steady myself. "You can't come in without permission. That's illegal." Gary grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Illegal. Who's gonna stop me?" You gonna call the cops? They'll laugh you out of the station. Sweetheart, I own this building. He let that last word hang in the air. Own. That night, lying awake in my violated apartment, I realized he was right. For now. But something deep inside me shifted. The fear was still there, buzzing in my veins, but beneath it, a seed of rage was planted. A quiet, dangerous thought: maybe I can't stop him yet, but one day I will. For months, I lived in a fog of anxiety. Every creak in the hallway made my chest tighten. Every time I left for work, I wondered what I'd come home to. I started double checking the locks, then triple checking. I shoved a chair under the doorknob at night, even though I knew it wouldn't stop him. Worse, Gary ramped up his harassment. He began leaving late notices on my door, even when I paid on time. He lost my maintenance requests and claimed I never filed them. He stood too close when talking, his eyes flicking around my apartment like he was mentally cataloging my possessions. I tried documenting everything, but paranoia made me sloppy. My hands shook when I took photos. My notes were scattered, written late at night when I was exhausted and panicked. The worst part wasn't the fear, it was the humiliation. The way Gary made me feel like a child, powerless, constantly second guessing myself. Every time he smirked, every time he dismissed my protests, it was like he was carving a message into my skin: you don't matter. You're nothing. And for a while, I almost believed him. But then came the night that would change everything. I was hauling groceries up the stairs when I saw Mrs. Delgado crying outside her door. She'd slipped on a leak Gary refused to fix and twisted her ankle. The poor woman was shaking, clutching the wall for support. I helped her inside, fetched ice, and sat with her until she calmed down. That's when she told me something that made my blood run cold. Gary said if I don't stop complaining, he'll evict me. He said I can't prove anything, so I should just be quiet. Hearing her say those words in that small, defeated voice snapped something inside me. It wasn't just me. Gary was destroying lives. He was counting on us being too scared, too scattered, too powerless to fight back. And for the first time, I thought, what if we weren't? That seed of rage, buried under months of fear, began to sprout. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain: Gary Thompson had picked the wrong tenant to push around, because I wasn't going to stay powerless forever. I didn't sleep much after that night with Mrs. Delgado. Her words kept echoing in my head. He said I can't prove anything, so I should just be quiet. It wasn't just the cruelty of it, it was the smug confidence behind Gary's threats. He knew the system favored him. He was banking on us folding, like we always did. But lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized something: he had revealed his weakness. Proof. He believed we couldn't prove anything. So what if we could? Working at a law office had its perks. I wasn't a lawyer, far from it, but I'd spent enough time around statutes, filings, and court procedures to know where to start digging. The next day, during my lunch break, I pulled up my state's tenant rights handbook. What I found made my pulse quicken. Landlords had to provide 24-hour written notice before entering an apartment, except in emergencies. Failure to maintain habitable living conditions, like heat, water, or safety, was grounds for legal action. Retaliation, like eviction threats after a tenant complaint, was explicitly illegal. Gary wasn't just a creep, he was breaking laws left and right. The problem: laws on paper didn't mean much unless you had the evidence and the guts to use them. That was when the idea began to take shape. I would build a case. Not just for me, for everyone Gary had screwed over. I went out and bought a cheap spiral notebook, the kind I used to use in college. On the front, I wrote in thick black marker, "Th book OFGAR. Every day I logged everything: the time and date of every inspection, every bogus late notice, every ignored repair request. I stapled in receipts, taped in photos, even printed copies of emails I sent him. When he muttered snide comments under his breath, I wrote down the exact words and how they made me feel. At first, it felt paranoid, but soon it became empowering. Every entry was like taking back a little piece of control. Instead of being consumed by fear, I was turning it into ammunition. But notes alone wouldn't cut it. I needed hard proof. The first time I set up the voice recorder, my hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. It was a cheap pen recorder I'd ordered online, disguised as a ballpoint pen, but with a tiny microphone inside. I left it on my coffee table right by the door. Sure enough, within a week, Gary let himself in again while I was at work. When I listened back later, my blood boiled. His heavy breathing filled the silence as he rifled through my mail. He muttered to himself, "She thinks she's so smart. Just wait." Hearing his voice on tape made my stomach turn. but it also filled me with a grim satisfaction. For the first time, I had evidence. Soon, I added a cheap security camera, one of those motion activated ones you can hide on a bookshelf. Every time Gary trespassed, the footage went straight to my cloud drive. Piece by piece, I was building a case. At first, I thought I'd do this alone, but then I remembered Mrs. Delgado's tear-streaked face, Tasha's fear, the young couple's whispers. Gary wasn't just my enemy, he was a parasite feeding off all of us. So one Saturday afternoon, I knocked on doors. It felt awkward, like canvassing for a campaign no one wanted to be part of. But once people realized I wasn't there to gossip, but to fight, their walls began to crack. Delgado showed me photos of her ceiling leak, the water damage spreading like cancer across her living room. Tasha pulled out a stack of texts from Gary threatening to make her life hard if she didn't stop complaining about the mold. The couple revealed receipts of under the table cash payments for their pet fees. Everyone had a story, and everyone had been convinced they were alone. That night, we gathered in my apartment. 5 tenants huddled around my wobbly dining table, swapping horror stories like war veterans. By the end, we made a pact. We'd document everything and share it with each other. Gary's reign of intimidation had worked because we were isolated. But now, we were united. It didn't take long to test our new alliance. One morning, Tasha called me in a panic. Gary had left her an eviction notice taped to her door. The paper looked official with bold red letters and legal jargon, but something about it felt off. I took one look and smirked. It wasn't even a real court document, just a letter Gary had typed up himself. We scanned it, compared it to real eviction forms online, and within hours I had drafted a response citing the exact tenant laws he was violating. Tasha delivered it with a copy to the housing authority. Gary was furious. He stormed up to her apartment, pounding on the door, demanding she withdraw her complaint. But this time, Tasha wasn't alone. 3 of us stood in the hallway, cameras rolling. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes besides smugness. For just a second, he looked worried. But Gary wasn't stupid. He knew something was shifting. One evening, I came home to find my front door wide open. My stomach dropped. Inside, nothing was stolen, but my book of Gary was gone from its usual place. Panic clawed at my throat. Had he found it? Was all my evidence gone? But then I noticed something. The book wasn't missing. It had been moved, sloppily shoved under my mattress, like someone had been searching for it but didn't have time to hide it well. Gary knew I was keeping records. He just didn't know how much I had. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the scattered papers, my pulse racing. For a moment, I almost broke. What if he retaliated harder? What if he found a way to evict me? But then I remembered Mrs. Delgado's ankle, Tasha's moldy walls, my own violated privacy. Fear turned into fuel. If Gary wanted a war, I was going to give him one. The next step was escalation. I scheduled a meeting with a local tenant advocacy group. Walking into their cramped office, decorated with posters about renters' rights, I felt like I was stepping onto sacred ground. The lawyer I spoke with, a sharp-eyed woman named Angela, listened carefully as I laid out everything. The notes, the recordings, the photos, the fake eviction. By the time I finished, she leaned back, whistling low. Your landlord is in serious violation of multiple housing codes, she said. If you and your neighbors are willing to testify, we can take him down. Hearing those words sent a shiver down my spine. For the first time, the impossible felt possible. Angela laid out the plan: file formal complaints with the housing authority, backed by our documentation, begin preparing a lawsuit for damages and harassment, alert the local media if necessary to shine a spotlight on Gary's practices. It wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. But suddenly I had an army. Something changed in me after that meeting. For months, Gary had lived rent-free in my head, a constant presence of fear. But now, I caught myself smiling at the thought of him pacing, wondering what I was up to. I started carrying myself differently. When he made one of his snide comments in the hallway, I didn't shrink away. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. That rattled him more than anything. He didn't know what I had, but he could sense the shift. Predators smell fear, and for the first time, I wasn't giving off the scent. The defining moment came during a tenants' meeting in my apartment. We were finalizing complaint forms when there was a sharp knock on the door. It was Gary. He barged in without waiting, eyes darting from face to face. His voice was low, dangerous. You think you're smart, huh? Ganging up on me? You don't know who you're messing with. The room went still. My heart pounded so loud I thought he could hear it. But then, slowly I stood. I didn't yell. I didn't shake. I just held up my phone, the screen glowing with the red recording light. Gary froze. His eyes flicked to the camera, then back to me. For the first time since I'd met him, he had no smirk. He left without another word. When the door slammed shut, the room erupted in nervous laughter, relief washing over us like a wave. And in that moment, I knew the balance of power had shifted. Gary wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping lukewarm coffee at my desk when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the City Housing Authority. Your complaint has been assigned to an inspector. Please expect an on-site visit this week. My pulse kicked up. This was it. The game was moving from shadows to daylight. I messaged the tenants group chat, inspection confirmed. Get your evidence ready. Within minutes, the replies rolled in, photos of leaks, screenshots of texts, lists of bogus fees. Each one was another nail in Gary's coffin. The inspector showed up on Thursday, a no-nonsense man in his 40s, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp behind wire, rim glasses. His name was Mr. Patel, and he had the calm authority of someone who had seen it all. Gary tried to block him at the front door. This is private property. Gary blustered, his face turning red. You can't just waltz in here without. Patel flipped open his badge. City Housing, I have the right to inspect. Step aside, I swear. Watching Gary's jaw clench was better than Christmas morning. We took Patel through each apartment one by one. Mrs. Delgado's water damage, Tasha's mold, the couple's rigged smoke detectors. In my unit, I showed him the broken locks, the security footage of Gary entering without notice, and the fake eviction letter. Patel scribbled notes furiously, muttering under his breath. Serious violations, fire hazard, unlawful entry. By the end, his clipboard was full. He looked Gary dead in the eye and said, "You'll be hearing from the city within the week." Gary's face was a storm cloud. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. He wasn't talking. He was just seething. Of course, Gary didn't go quietly. 2 days later, I found a new notice taped to my door. LA's termini vacati in 7 days. My stomach dropped. He couldn't do that, not legally, but the sight of it still sent panic clawing through my chest. I took a deep breath, snapped a photo, and sent it straight to Angela, the tenant lawyer. Her reply came within minutes. He just handed us retaliation on a silver platter. Do not move. Do not respond. We'll file an injunction. The next day, Gary confronted me in the hallway. His voice was low, venomous. You think your little stunt with the inspector scares me. I've been doing this for 20 years. Tenants come and go. But me? I'm still here. I forced myself to smile, though my heart was hammering. Not for long, Gary. That flicker of doubt in his eyes was all I needed to keep going. Angela moved fast. Within a week, she had drafted a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the tenants. Harassment, unlawful entry, failure to maintain habitable conditions, retaliation. The list was long, damning, and backed by mountains of evidence. When Gary was served, he acted like it was a joke. He waved the papers around in the parking lot, laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at this nonsense. A bunch of crybabies think they can take me down. You'll be crawling back to me in a month. But the laughter didn't reach his eyes, and behind closed doors, the cracks were showing. While the lawsuit crawled through the courts, the housing authority hit Gary with fines, thousands of dollars in penalties for code violations. Every week, another letter, another bill. Tenants started withholding rent, placing it into an escrow account as the law allowed. Suddenly, Gary's steady stream of cash dried up. His truck, once polished and gleaming, sat dirty in the lot. His beer gut looked bigger, his shirts more wrinkled. The man who strutted around like a king was starting to look like a cornered animal. That's when I made the call to a local reporter. I'd been saving this card for the right moment. With Gary already bleeding money and scrambling under legal fire, public exposure would be the death blow. The reporter loved the story. Slumlord exploits tenants, faces backlash. She interviewed us in our apartments, filmed the mold, the leaks, the broken locks. She even captured Gary trying to shoo her off the property, his face red and twisted with rage. When the segment aired on the 6 o'clock news, I sat in my living room with the other tenants, watching Gary's empire crumble on Lev TV. His name was plastered on the screen, his smirk replaced by an image of him shouting at the camera. My phone buzzed nonstop, friends, coworkers, even distant relatives texting, "Isn't that your landlord on the news?" By the next morning, Gary's reputation was radioactive. Contractors refused to work for him. Realtors wouldn't return his calls. The climax came 6 months later, in a cramped county courtroom that smelled faintly of mildew and coffee. Gary showed up in a wrinkled suit, his tie askew, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to swagger, but the effect was ruined by the stack of folders he kept fumbling. We sat together. Me, Mrs. Delgado, Tasha, the young couple, a united front. Angela stood tall at the podium, calm and razor sharp. The judge listened as Angela laid out our case piece by piece, the illegal entries, the fake eviction, the harassment, the health hazards. She played the audio recording of Gary muttering threats in my apartment, the video of him barging into Tasha's place, the photos of Mrs. Delgado's ceiling. Gary tried to bluster, but every time he opened his mouth, the judge shut him down. Mr. Thompson, do you have documentation to refute this? Oh. Well, you see, answer the question. Yes or no? No? By the end, Gary wasn't smirking. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal, significant financial damages to each tenant. Court order forcing him to repair all violations within 30 days. An injunction preventing any further harassment or unlawful entry. It was a legal annihilation. But the real cherry on top came weeks later. Gary couldn't pay the fines, couldn't pay the damages, couldn't afford the repairs. One by one, his properties slipped into foreclosure. The building we lived in, bought out by a new landlord, a young woman with actual integrity, who replaced the locks and lowered the rent to keep good tenants. The day the foreclosure notice went up on Gary's office door, we all gathered in the parking lot with coffee cups in hand. I watched him load the last of his things into his beat-up truck. His once proud stride was gone, replaced with the shuffle of a broken man. For the first time in a year, I breathed without fear. As he drove off, I couldn't resist whispering, "Who's crawling back now, Gary?" Revenge isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the absence of fear, the ability to sleep through the night without wondering if your door will open. But make no mistake, watching Gary's empire crumble piece by piece was the sweetest justice I've ever tasted. And the best part, we didn't just save ourselves. We saved every tenant who would have come after us. Gary Thompson would never own another property in this city again. He underestimated us. He underestimated me. And that was his fatal mistake. The strangest thing about revenge is how quiet the victory feels once the shouting stops. When Gary drove away that final day, his truck coughing smoke as it disappeared down the road, I expected cheers, fireworks, some cinematic swell of music in the background. Instead, what I felt was silence, a deep, bone-deep silence. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket and whispers, "It's over." Life in the building changed almost overnight. Locks were replaced with shiny new deadbolts. The broken railing on the second floor, the one we used to joke about collapsing if you leaned too hard, was reinforced within the first week. Maintenance requests actually got answered. The smell of mold slowly gave way to the scent of fresh paint and cleaning supplies. And for the first time, I didn't tense up when I heard footsteps in the hallway. We started having little gatherings in the courtyard on weekends. Nothing fancy, just neighbors with folding chairs and shared snacks. The young couple grilled hot dogs, Mrs. Delgado brought empanadas, and Tasha turned up with her famous sangria. There was laughter again, real laughter. The kind we hadn't dared to let out when Gary prowled around, always listening, always ready to twist joy into punishment. It felt like reclaiming a piece of ourselves. Word about Gary trickled back to us in pieces. One tenant spotted him at a dingy bar on the edge of town, slumped over the counter at noon. Another heard he was living out of his truck for a while, then couch surfing with a cousin. His properties had all slipped away, auctioned off one by one. The man who used to strut like a king was now a ghost haunting the edges of town. I heard rumors that he tried to start over in another city, but the news segment followed him like a scarlet letter. That contractor spread the word about his scams, that no bank would finance him again. He wasn't just ruined, he was radioactive. But victory isn't free. For months, I carried the weight of it all in my chest, the stress of fighting, the late nights writing statements, the fear that maybe it wouldn't work. Even after Gary was gone, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, half expecting to find him in my living room. That's the thing they don't tell you about revenge. It doesn't erase the trauma. It just makes sure the person who caused it can't hurt you again. Therapy helped. So did the laughter in the courtyard, the warmth of neighbors who turned into family. Slowly, the knots inside me loosened. One night I realized I'd gone a full week without thinking about Gary. That was when I knew I'd finally won. Not just in court, not just in the news, but in my own mind. 6 months after the ruling, I got an email from Angela, our lawyer, Subject: case closed, settlement payments finalized. The message was short, clinical. The escrowed rent had been released, damages awarded, and everything settled in our favor. Attached was the official letter from the court. I printed it out, framed it, and hung it in my living room. Not out of pettiness, okay, maybe a little, but as a reminder that bullies fall, that systems, slow as they are, can work if you push hard enough, that sometimes justice really does land on the right side. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the courtyard gold, Mrs. Delgado sat beside me. She said softly, "I don't think we would have survived him without you." I shook my head. "We all did this together." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Maybe. But you lit the match. You gave us courage." It hit me then. This wasn't just revenge. It was resistance. It was proof that ordinary people, when they stand together, can topple giants. A year after it all ended, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Gary's jagged scrawl. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting some fresh wave of bile. Instead, it was short, just 2 words written in shaky pen. "You won." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at that slip of paper. There was no satisfaction in it, not really. It was like hearing the final note of a song you'd been playing for years. Just silence after. I folded it neatly, slid it into the back of the framed court letter, and left it there. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't plotting the revenge or even executing it. The hardest part was holding my nerve when fear threatened to break me. Gary thrived on intimidation, on making us feel small, powerless. That was his weapon. And once I stopped letting him scare me, he lost his grip. That's the lesson I carry now. Bullies are only as strong as the fear they create. Years later, the building still stands, brighter than before. Families move in, kids ride bikes in the courtyard, laughter echoes through the halls. Most of the original tenants have moved on, chasing new jobs or bigger homes, but we keep in touch. Sometimes we joke about writing a book, The Slumlord Who Lost Everything. Maybe one day we will. As for me, I still live here. Every morning when I lock my door with a working lock, safe and secure, I take a deep breath of peace. Not because of revenge, but because we took back what was ours: dignity, safety, community. Revenge didn't make me whole, but it gave me justice. It gave me closure. And sometimes that's enough. One warm evening, I stood in the courtyard as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The air smelled of grilled food and fresh cut grass. Laughter rang out, kids chasing each other, neighbors chatting, music playing softly from an open window. I closed my eyes, let it wash over me. For the first time in years, it felt like home. And in that moment, I knew the story was finished. Gary was gone. We were still here, and that was the sweetest revenge of all.